Chapter 3. The courtiers submitted petitions for Shi Xiujie's execution for more than half a month, but Li Jintian remained unmoved throughout. On the contrary, he even reinstated Shi Xiujie's position as an imperial concubine. Every night he would dream back to that lonely and cold palace, seeing Xi Xiujie kneel in front of his memorial tablet and weep, that grief suppressed to the extreme, and those deathly still eyes that could not show a hint of joy, even when sitting upon the empress' seat, repeatedly tormented Li Jintian's nerves. He thought that Xi Xiujie had lived a luxurious life after his death, but found that he had also become a walking corpse. The only thing that motivated him to continue living was the thought of seeking revenge on his behalf. In this case, it seemed that he was the lucky one for dying first, while the one left behind was trapped in endless pain and despair. The Qi family used all their clan's power to recover the throne. Most of the clan members were killed or wounded in battle, leaving only the elderly and weak women and children. And Qi Xiujie also committed suicide after burying the bones of his late husband, never enjoying a bit of glory. Li Jintian often woke up from this dream, his chest unceasingly stifled with pain. He wanted to see how Qi Xiujie was doing, but he felt too timid and guilt-ridden, so he could only live with tangled emotions day after day. Unconsciously, he'd already started believing in the two dreams, but he would rather disband the entire harem for Gao Min's sake. These emotions could not be faked, so he wouldn't move against the Gao family until they committed an act of treason. On this day, the courtiers finally relented and no longer petitioned the emperor to execute the Qi family's final spawn, expressing their concerns about the frequent invasion of the Xiji race instead. Prince Li was the first to come forward to beg the emperor to send troops to Xiji, followed by Gao Lang, then the rest of the court officials. Li Jintian was already interested in conquering Xiji, so he immediately expressed that he would set up troops as quickly as possible. "Dare to question your majesty, do you have a suitable candidate for general?" Prince Li bowed and inquired. "No, you can recommend me a few." "This small official recommends General Gao Min. Does your majesty find this appropriate?" Prince Li's statement shocked the other courtiers. They all knew who Gao Min was. They also all knew that before he entered the harem, he was a fierce general that guarded the borders, but now he already belonged to the emperor and had also given birth to a prince. How could he fraternize with soldiers again? That's indecent. Some wanted to step forward to oppose, but Gao Lang stepped forward to vigorously recommend his younger brother, even phrasing it in an elegant way. When appointing people by their merits, don't exclude friends or relatives. Gao Lang knew that Li Jintian's favor and tolerance for his brother was bottomless, so he'd cooperated with Prince Li to put on this bold proposal. Li Jintian had bottomless tolerance for Gao Min. That was the truth, but it was also in the past. Now, Li Jintian was like a blindfolded person who'd suddenly been relieved of their cloth. He could finally see the circumstances of the imperial court and the harem clearly. The courtiers, who'd obviously wanted to oppose, silently returned to their seats after Gao Lang spoke up. Anyone could see that the imperial court had already become Gao Lang and Prince Li's territory. The emperor was only a display piece, just nodding whenever they put forth a suggestion. Most of the beauties in the harem had already been dismissed by him, leaving behind the few that managed to bear children. They didn't have the emperor's favor. All of them relied on Gao Ming's tongue to live. The harem had already been thoroughly turned into the Gao family's territory. Was there any room for the emperor? And now, why would Prince Li recommend Gao Min? What was the relationship between them in private? Li Jintian's heart was burning, but it didn't show on his face. He just said in a mild tone that he would need a few days to think about it before he made a decision. Gao Lang and Prince Li did not push it. Anyway, they both knew that once Li Jintian went back to the harem, Gao Min would find a way to convince him. Gao Min was tired of being trapped inside the high walls of the palace. After Li Jintian ended the court session, he went to Yangxin Palace and pleaded to be made commander of Xi Yi. Li Jintian refused by making the excuse that he needed to take care of their child. But he didn't give up. He knelt down and coldly said, "Your Majesty once said that you'd let me walk shoulder to shoulder with you. Was your so-called shoulder to shoulder just trapping me in this golden cage to be your pet? I can sacrifice my life for your Majesty, but your Majesty can't even grant me this one wish." He raised his eyes to look straight at the Emperor. His eyes were full of reluctance and resentment. The resentment had continued from the last life into this life. In fact, it grew thicker and thicker, to the point where it could never dissolve. He had already planned to open up his heart and accept Li Jintian, but he didn't expect the other man to forgive Shi Xiuji for no reason, so his resentment was ignited and boiling again. At the same time, he hated himself, feeling that he should not be caught up in the whirlpool of fighting for favor like a female, living without dignity. He wanted to put on armor and pick up the sword, setting foot on the free and expansive land of the frontier. If the two could sit down and talk it out, they would be able to resolve this conflict. But now, Li Jintian was stabbed by the resentment in Gao Min's eyes. He thought that after 3 years of cuddling, even a stone could be warmed up. But he didn't expect Gao Min's heart to be harder than a stone. Gao Min was unexpectedly resentful of what happened in the past life. He really wasn't willing to accompany him to the spring. This resentment might drive him to do something harmful to him one day. He was defenseless against his attacks. Li Jintian was terrified. He suddenly felt that he was really foolish for thinking he could live peacefully with Gao Min after they were reborn. He stared at Gao Min for a long time, then stormed off. Li Jintian wandered aimlessly through the palace and unwittingly arrived at the Xishan Palace. He hesitated for a long time before stepping in. Xi Xiujie was standing behind the desk, practicing his writing. His head was bowed, hiding his expression. When he heard the servant's announcement, he seemed very surprised, his eyes full of disbelief and gratefulness. "This villain attends to the Emperor." He knelt down respectfully. Li Jintian didn't tell him to rise, just looking at him with deep and unfathomable eyes. After a long while, he slowly asked, "Have you been well lately?" Replying to the Emperor, "This villain's life is very good." Li Jintian was slightly startled by his words. This can be considered a good life? Living in an empty palace without luxurious furnishings or personal servant, just like the cold palace? But yes, compared to the gruesome prison, isn't this infinitely better? Feelings of guilt attacked his heart once again, making Li Jintian feel suffocated in his chest. He sat on a chair and waved his hand. "Get up." Zhu Yunsheng didn't move. He hesitated for a moment before, replying, in a hoarse voice, "This villain has unsettled matter on his heart, so dares not get up. Li Jintian suddenly had a gloomy expression, as if he knew that his question would be what his question would be about, but he still rubbed his brows and tiredly said, "Don't hesitate to ask your doubt." Zhu Sheng gave a cautious nod, asking in a sorrowful tone, "Dare to question your majesty. Why do you want to destroy my chief family? What did we do wrong?" "Your father and Shuangwan secretly colluded to rebel. Didn't you know?" When he said this, Li Jintian felt pangs after pangs of weakness in his heart. When he was purging the Qi family, he actually hadn't found any proof of misconduct. He could no longer swear that his decision to wipe out the Qi family was the right one. He wanted to find the truth, but was afraid to touch the truth. The light in Zhou Yunsheng's eyes died, a haggard look on his face. He felt deep shame, knocking his head against the floor several times. He choked out, "So that was the case. This villain actually had no knowledge of this matter. This villain is ashamed to face your majesty. Please, your majesty, put this villain to death." After saying this, he knocked his head a few more times, so hard that his forehead started to bleed. Li Jintian quickly reached out to pull him up, then looked into his eyes with resolve. His eyes were pure black, except for shame, despair, and guilt. There was no trace of resentment. He'd destroyed his family, but Qi Shujie felt no resentment. He was also willing to die. His loyalty to him did not pale in comparison to Gao Min's. No, that was wrong. His loyalty was much greater than Gao Min's. In the last life, although Qi Shujie had a reputation for being arrogant, he was always submissive in front of him. He never disobeyed. Although the type of loyalty that made Gao Min accompany him till death was rare, Qi Shujie had forced himself to live in humiliation, trying every possible means to avenge him. His heart bore so much suffering that it was probably even more painful than death. That's why Shi Shujie couldn't hold out after it was over. He didn't enjoy the glory he should have enjoyed, just dying alone in the Zishan palace, hanging from the roof beam. Looking at the person who was humbled into dust in front of him, who had completely given up on living because of him, Li Xintian felt like a knife was stabbing into his heart. In the last life, he thought he'd loved the wrong person, but in fact he hadn't. In this life, he thought he loved the right person, but in fact he was wrong again. Shi Shujie did everything for him, but didn't say anything, while Gao Min constantly brought up his kindness in the last life, afraid he would forget it. He was wrong for 2 lifetimes, but at this point he was deeply in love with Gao Min. He was so deeply in love with Gao Min that he couldn't take it back. He thought he was extremely pitiful, but the Qi Shujie in front of him, whose heart had died, was a million times more painful than he was. Both of them had been played by fate. With Gao Min's cold resentment as contrast, Qi Shujie's humbleness made Li Jintian's guilt towards him root even deeper. He forcefully pulled the other man up, pressed him into the chair, and cautiously urged, I don't blame you. You must live well." He paused a moment, then added, "I'll take good care of you. I can compensate you for whatever you want." A flicker of light broke out from Zhou Yunsheng's dead eyes. He hesitantly asked, "Is it okay for this villain to want a child?" Li Jintian was once again stumped by his question. He knew that Gao Min had poisoned Qi Shujie soon after rebirth, because he suspected that Qi Shujie was responsible for the death of his son in the last life. Li Jintian treated it as compensation and pretended not to know. He even secretly cooperated. Shi Shujie Jie's body was already completely destroyed. He absolutely couldn't have any children. And in the last life, in Shuang Wang's harem, Shi Shuxie had also destroyed his own body, so he wouldn't give birth to Shuang Wang's evil spawn. This was simply a rotten debt that couldn't be summed up. Li Xintian felt a splitting headache, and he was even more afraid to face Shi Shujie. Shi Shujie seemed to sense the reason behind his hesitation. He added, "This villain was not asking for a biological child. This villain's family has committed such a heinous crime. This villain doesn't dare hope for your majesty's favor once again. These days, there are many children in the palace who have lost their imperial concubine mother or father. This villain only wants to adopt one. This villain is already all alone in the world." His humble words were like a blunt knife, cutting into Li Jintian's heart slice by slice. He understood his meaning. He was all alone in the world, lonely and helpless. If he doesn't have someone to console him, he might give up on living like in the last life. The degree of Li Jintian's hate towards Shi Xiuxie before was the degree of guilt he felt now. He threw out a "pick anyone you want" and quickly fled. His face was burning red, as if he'd received a dozen slaps.